I've got to manage myself, I've got to manage my mind. The task is not easy, but the high heights I climb.
I'm determined to succeed, so no excuses, please. If you don't want success in life, then don't hinder me. Yes, let the whole world know you are a CEO. You are a CEO. I'm a CEO. You are a CEO. I'm a CEO. The time is here to celebrate. You are a CEO. You are a CEO. You are a CEO. You are a CEO. Yes, let the whole world know. The time is here to celebrate. Success is calling, so don't be late. You are a CEO.
Hello everyone, Michael Lee Parker here, and we are so excited to have just another show that is about something so important. And today, before I even jump in, I want to remind you that if you are new, make sure that you go to our YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe, click that little bell, and make sure that you might have heard the bell there. It was kind of unique here in the studio today, but if you see that bell, you make sure and click it because you get all of our notifications anytime we upload something new. Tonight, we are talking about, not today, bad habits go away. And I want to reemphasize how important this is because all of us have some bad habits. No one is exempt. All of us are trying to overcome something, be better at something, try to get control of something. And so tonight, we're going to discuss a lot about habits, how habits work. And it's a good time for you to get your pen and paper out, take note of things that you can actually use, because all of us got different things that we would like to do better and have better habits in our life and remove some of the habits that we don't like. So I want you to keep that in mind, and we're going to actually delve deep. I'm going to pull out the whiteboard. I'm going to be using some slides as well, but I want you to think about the fact that there is something called a habit, the fact that there are things that we have patterns in our life that continually come back. These are the things that imagine there is a way for us to understand them better and begin to turn them toward positive tools in our life versus negative ones. And what if you could create habits for things that you actually want to have habits for and be more successful at overcoming the habits that you don't want? This is what we're talking about. This is why this is so important. I'm going to take a quick break, and when I come back, we're going to jump in and understand more about breaking those bad habits. I'll be right back. Everyone, welcome back, and we are going to continue our discussion on habits. And before I go over a few slides with you and talk deeper into the habit loop, I want to really explain how habits start and how some of these things impact us in our day-to-day life. So when you think about it, starting off, normally there's always some sort of action that takes place, something that happens, right? So this just represents, kind of a check mark. Something happens in our life, something transpires. Now, when something happens and we have an experience, so I'm gonna draw a brain here Haven't drew a brain in a while, so forgive me. Not all the time we draw brains, but something like this, and we can see we have our brain. We know there's a right and left brain. There's different ways that you can draw it. But when you're thinking about the impact and how things begin to move from things that we do to the impact on the brain. And so from a scientific perspective, I want you just to understand just some of the science behind this. The brain releases something called dopamine. And dopamine is a chemical reaction that gives us happy feelings, right? So when we think about happy feelings, really this is coming from this dopamine reaction. And there's also a word I want to teach you called euphoria. And euphoria is an intense happiness. And so when there's an intense happiness that comes from some action, something that happened, and don't look at happiness as always something enjoyable that or good or bad per se, but an intense feeling, right? Some people that came from something they did or something they didn't do. We know there's different things. It can be food, there's drugs, there's relationships, there's all kinds of things. But in that moment, it triggered an intense response. Whatever that might be. This is even true with people who have done things that are not so good. You know, the first time someone stole from someone or they did something that was exciting, right? But it wasn't necessarily good. There are people that have joined gangs and did things that they shouldn't have done, but had a rush and an excitement from it. So don't always look at it, even though I said happy feeling, look at it as an intense feeling. But a lot of times there are things that do end up making us happy, because even the person who did something that wasn't so good, and if that made them happy, then maybe they are not so good as a person and they need to change that, because that should not make them happy. So these are things that we have to deal with internally. So when we think about this energy and these feelings, right, come to us. And this is where we start to create, again, this is a big influence on how we think and what we end up doing, because these feelings are very real and we feel these feelings. Now, when I say this, keep in mind, this is kind of a deep subject here that we're getting into, because when I say that these feelings come to you, I want you to think about that for a minute. Then who is the you, right? Because we know when we think about you and I, our brain is right here in our head, right? And we're talking about it here in more detail. But when we think about the you, the actual person, so one of the things about the real you, we have the ability to make decisions. We have a sense of control. We have self-will. So people will call this different things, and not to get into religion or what have you, I call this the soul. And the soul of a person is really where decisions are made. And it is different from the body or the brain. And that's why sometimes when we say, I feel sad, who is the I and where is the feel sad coming from, right? So just think about that. I feel sad. Well, the feeling, that is actually a reaction that is coming from the brain. The I is the person. It's the real you that can make a decision. What are you going to do with that feeling? Are you going to stay sad? Or are you going to choose, to try to fight against that? This is very important, because when we think about habits, when we think about what happens to human behavior, we have to understand these relationships. So the same thing when I say I feel happy, right? Who is the I? Where is that feeling coming from? So a lot of times, because remember, in the brain, we also are dealing with storage. We're dealing with memory. And we tend to remember things and we store things. So once we do, right, we do something and we register that action with a feeling or with an actual intense experience, then it is stored to memory. And then it influences us and how we feel, which always leads again to what we end up doing. And now this is where habits begin to form. So this is very important. I want you to keep this in mind for our discussion today, because again, this is related. This is the foundation to it all. All right, now let's go to, I want to switch over here to I want to switch over here to my presentation for a minute, and I want to walk you deeper into the habit loop. Now, as you can see on the screen, there is triggers. So your trigger in the habit loop is the reminder in that signal that tells us it's time to go to the routine, the thing that I do all the time. So we want to make sure that we always are understanding our triggers. And then we go into the routine. Now, the routine is the actual habit itself, the habit that could be either good or bad. So every routine can be good or bad. So keep in mind, all routines are not bad habits. You can have good habits as well. So this is important. And then whenever we do that specific routine, it leads to a reward. And that reward is the positive feedback that we get from the action we take or the routine that we're in, and that reward is what keeps us in the habit loop. So this is just some of the framework of the habit loop. I really want you to understand this because this habit loop is how it all works. And this is what we can learn how to use it for good or how it could be bad to us, and then we can, try to fight the bad. Now let's go a little bit deeper into another example of this. Now here's another way of describing the habit loop. Same thing. Instead of saying trigger, we're saying cue. What is the cue? What is the signal? What is the trigger, right? So it kicks the brain into automatic mode. It tells it which habit to use. Every trigger has a specific habit connected to it. So that specific cue is the cue for that routine, right? It's almost like an orchestrator of a band. And when he gives a certain cue, the flutes know to come in. Another cue, the saxophones come in. Another cue, the horns, the trumpets know what to do. Another cue, the piano goes for its solo. Well, there are cues within you. There are cues within me that when that cue comes or that trigger comes, it ignites that routine that goes with that cue. So that's very important. And there's a specific reward that comes for each routine. So that routine, though, remember, it can be a physical routine, a mental routine, an emotional routine. So there could even be an emotional routine that when this is said or when this happens or when someone responds to me this way, there's an emotional routine I go through, right? There's a way that I go through my experience of feeling happy or my experience of feeling sad, and I do the same routine every time, the same thought process, the same emotional journey, the same steps in my mind, the same sequence of thoughts. Every time that cue is hit, every time that trigger is hit, I go through that pattern. This is the routine. Now, if you go back to that for a minute, I want you to see that there's also a reward, and that reward is a prize. It's telling your brain that the loop is worth remembering in the future. So the reward is not just the reward for the moment. Every time you are rewarded after the routine, it is an investment in the next time you do it again. And this is why the habit loop is so important. This is why we have to understand this. Now, let's look at another example here. Here's an example, just a simple example, of a cue or trigger being the buzzing of your phone. Right? I just thought I had my phone on my hip because I'm so used to having it on there. And again, it's habit, right? So I remember one time I thought my phone was ringing. I really felt vibrations and there was nothing there. It was just, they call it phantom cell phone rings because we're so used to having our phones. And so when you look at the cue, when your phone rings, you have a routine of grabbing it and looking at your email, and the reward is the information that you get. And you start to crave distraction. So we've actually entered into something where we've developed a habit of being distracted. That's a habit now. And the cue is anytime something buzzes, anytime something happens, you can't ignore it. It's a cue and you go to your routine. Pick it up, look at it. You've got to find out who texted you, who emailed you. The reward is I got the information now and I got to distract from whatever I was doing, and then until the cue comes again. So this is a habit, a distraction habit think about it, that we've created. Just an example. Now, Let's take a step back here, and I want you to see here, when you look, here's another trigger. Here's someone who loves coffee, right? And I know it's a little sensitive out there, so all you coffee lovers, don't get upset at me. I'm just teaching you about habit loops. I might have triggered something, but let's talk about this a little bit. So think about it. When a person is really develop a behavior or habit where coffee is concerned, the trigger can actually be a feeling. So it could be that when I feel tired, that's the trigger. And it makes me think about the routine of going to coffee, and I go through the whole experience. How I get the coffee, where I go to get the coffee. The reward is I feel perky and excited again, right? And so that now is an investment in, I'm gonna do this again when I feel tired again. And that habit loop is defined and it is strong. So this is a very important thing to understand, and this is why habit formation is so critical. And this can happen in very serious areas of our life, things that impact our health, our body and mind. It can be in emotional areas in terms of how we think, how we feel. Now think about it. There can be a trigger for you to go through a sequence of feelings. So think about that. Sometimes the routine is very physical. When my alarm clock goes off, I go and wash my face, and then I go to the restroom, then I go to the shower. That's my routine. That's a good routine, right? I can have a different routine for an emotional pattern, though, where whenever someone says something about a specific area of my life or in a specific way or makes me feel a certain way, I go through the same emotional sequence because it is a pattern. It is a habit. And this is why we have to understand the habit loop so that we can start making that loop actually work for us. I hope you enjoyed this foundation and a little bit of a deeper discussion on habits. When I come back, we're going to talk about some tips that you can use to start to break habits and make the habit loop work for you. I'll be right back. All right, everyone, we are back and we are still talking about one of the most important subjects to all of us is how do we break these bad habits in our life? We all have them. No one is innocent, but at the same token, we all have the opportunity to be better, and we can get better through information, through education, and through coaching, and that's what we're focusing on here tonight. So one of the first things I want to bring up that is often overlooked and misunderstood in terms of the role it can play when you're trying to overcome bad habits. And that has to do with your level of healthiness and your level of stress. We tend to do what we don't want to do when we're feeling stressed and unhealthy. So breaking bad habits really begins with taking care of yourself. And so I want to, before even getting into a few important things, I want you to keep in mind that this does play a role. You can't say I want to attack and go after some of my bad habits and you don't take care of yourself. You don't take care of your body. You're not thinking about exercise, how you eat, how you sleep, how you care for your hygiene, all these different things, doing things that you enjoy, connecting with nature sometimes. All of these different things are very important because when you are not in a healthy place and then you go and try to attack something that's unhealthy in your life, it is very difficult to do. You just don't have the energy and the mental capacity to do it. You'll be surprised when you're consistent in working out, when you're eating better, when your sleep patterns are better. It's not that it makes bad habits go away, but it does make you and put you in a better position to deal with those things and fight them better and have the energy and and the will to do it. So don't mistake this as being a small item. This is a very important item, and it's oftentimes why some people never make a dent at dealing with their bad habits, because they don't take care of themselves. And so keep this in mind, very important. And this is also critical when you have a habit that's not good for you. And then on top of that, you're not taking care of yourself. So the habit is reinforced. It's just one big, celebration of not caring for self. And you don't want to do that. So here's another important element when we talk about that. There's a lot of ways to relieve stress. So make sure you keep that in mind. Playing with a pet, exercising, meditating, prayer, listening to music, taking a nap. All these things are very good things. I want you to see that. Give them a full screen of that there. I want y'all to really get a good look at that. Some of you got a pet that you really like, or a hobby. You like to draw, or you like to play music, or you might like to go for walks. This stuff is very important. Don't think it plays no role in this. We're not even getting in a habit yet. And also, I want to tell you a secret, is some of these stress relieving activities can also be ways that you can help to break a habit. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So keep this in mind. Now, another area that I want to focus on is there's a critical question I want to ask you. What part of this habit loop should I focus on fighting? There's the cue, there's the routine, there's the reward. And when you think about that, I want you to think about, if you fought at each area of the habit loop, which would give you the best result. So if we started at the reward area, in other words, the feeling I get when I do the routine or the habit, and you say, well, I'm going to fight at the reward level. So that means you still do the habit, but you say, I hate that I'm doing this, or I'm not enjoying it though. I'm eating this donut, but I'm upset at myself, right? But that is not going to change the habit. I mean, you can fight there if you want, but you're already in pretty deep. Now, if you go to the routine level, so while you're in the midst of the routine, you try to fight the routine. You say, I'm not going to, do this. I'm not going to eat this. I'm not going to go here. I'm not going to think this way. But you're already in the struggle of it, and you're trying now to fight it. Very hard to win that battle. And so that leaves us with the cue or the trigger. Now, I want you to think about that, the cue or the trigger. Again, we're talking about, where do I fight? What portion of the habit loop do I fight? Now, let's first for a minute just understand this statement. Know your triggers. I can't say enough about that, because if you know your triggers, now I didn't say know your habits. I didn't say know your routine. I didn't say know the reward and why the reward is good. I didn't say that. Know your triggers. What is it that triggers the habit? So it's very important to think about that. So, as you can see in the example, let's pull that back up. These are people with different triggers. So, here's someone that, is talking on the phone, someone who's shopping, and maybe when they, on a particular day, when they don't have something to do, they think about shopping and they overshop. Here's someone who has a problem with gambling. Here's someone with a drug addiction, but that drug, that feeling to want to do those drugs comes at a particular time of day when a particular thing happens or when they feel a certain way. Here's a person with a smoking problem. Here's someone who can't turn the television off, watches it too long and lets their whole life go by. Well, what is the trigger? What is it that cues you or triggers you to then move into that habit? Here's someone eating, drinking. So all of this is you want to think about not just the habit, study the trigger. Because the trigger is really the root. And when you start to deal with the trigger, if you remove the trigger, the loop can't start. So this is important. And a lot of times when, even sometimes when there's a dramatic change in your life, it's always a good chance to change some of your triggers. So some people, when they drive by, I know for me, I used to love donuts, and I had to change some of my habits regarding donuts. And if, I used to go to a certain area, and whenever I flew into that area, this is where my favorite donuts are. I had a habit of going to that donut place. And so I had to look at some of those triggers and really fight them, right? And think about different things when I went into that area, find somewhere new to go, something different to do, not even get off that particular exit where I knew that place was, eat on a different side of town, whatever you got to do, because all it takes is one cue, one trigger, and you are there in your routine. When I get off on this exit, I have always went to that donut shop, and we not going to stop today. That's how you feel. But when you change the cue, change the trigger, you can change the routine, you don't get the reward, and you slowly begin to weaken that habit within yourself. Very, very important. All right, so let's, speaking of triggers, this is a pretty graphic example, but the trigger is the gun. The trigger is what's killing us. The trigger is the bullet. The trigger is the start of it all. Takes us into the routine, starts the bad habit. But as you can see below here, when you replace that trigger with awareness, and that's what we are getting today. When we become aware of our trigger, we can interrupt the routine and we can create a good habit. This is again, and even the interruption of that routine can be the beginning of the good habit. So this is a process. Now, again, I hope you're listening closely. This is some serious stuff we're talking about. This is life-altering information we're going over. But I want to be honest with you, this is not easy. You don't just listen to a presentation like this and poof, pow, you got it. It doesn't work like that. It's a fight, it's a struggle, it's a decision, and it takes time. People have said it takes 21 days to break a habit. Well, there's been some deeper science that sometimes it takes 60 days, sometimes it takes 200 days to break a habit. Depends how strong that habit is. It depends how strong you are. All these things are factors, but don't give up. Some people have dropped things right away. I know when I changed my eating habits, I had to just stop right away. I went into my pantry and I threw away all the stuff that I love. I have a candy drawer. I emptied it out. Now, for me, someone else might have said, I'm not going to quite throw it away. I'm just going to be strong enough to break the habit, right? I can look at it and it doesn't. Well, I knew that just walking by the drawer was a trigger. Walking in my pantry was a trigger. If I saw a bag, the little orange just side part of the Dorito bag was a trigger. Anything that I could see, smell, it reminded me of those habits that run deep in my life. So I had to get it all out, put new things in so that those triggers were removed before I even addressed the habit. And successfully, I was able to change those habits. And now, almost 4 years, my eating has changed. I never went back. And that's a success story. And you can create a success story in your life, whatever that may need to be for you. Now, keep this in mind. This is important. Oftentimes, willpower just won't do it. So when people say, I'm going to be strong in my mind, you know, there's people that said, I'm not going to smoke anymore. All their brain heard was smoke. It didn't hear all the other stuff because it's so wired. So when you just say that to yourself, I'm not going to eat this anymore, I'm not going to do this anymore, it only hears the part it wants to hear because it's so used. Whenever smoke is in a sentence, it just thinks about smoking. Whenever, junk food is in a sentence, it just thinks about the donut. So sometimes willpower is not good enough. I want to tell you a secret though. Replacing bad habits with new ones is the key. Instead of just saying through willpower, I'm going to stop this and then, I'm not going to do this anymore, you'll find out that that is very, very unsuccessful. But when you see, we talked about the brain and the way we are made with human behavior, we are driven by action. We are driven by doing. Remember, it was doing that started the habit in the first place. We talked about the doing that led to euphoria, that led to the reward and created the habit. So doing is also your way out of it. So when you think about new habits, you have to do new things. So if you know you tend to eat the wrong thing late at night, then you have to start trying to either go to bed earlier or eat something different at night on purpose to break that and create a new habit. These are things that you have to start to think about. So think about replacing. Sometimes people only think about the removal, but if you remove something that was bad, there's a vacuum there and you're looking for something to fulfill it with. But if you attack habits knowing you got to put something in its place, you'll be more successful. Come in knowing that something else has to be put in the place of the bad habit. So, something you used to do, if you know you're wasting too much time on television, you're doing, there's something that you're doing at 8 o'clock, on a particular night, you can replace that by saying, I'm going to start working out at that same specific time and create a new habit. I'm going to start getting with a friend at that specific time. I'm going to read a book at that specific time. And you're purposely doing it at the time that the trigger is dominant so that you can create a new habit and a new routine, get a new reward, and begin to change the loop in your life. So this is very important. Replacement is very critical, not just removal. All right, here's another important point that I want to leave with you, is that when you can connect your struggle to something important to you, it will strengthen your success. My point is, when you not only replace, fight the triggers, make a decision, but when you make it up in your mind that I am also doing this for something higher, for a deeper purpose. You saw that picture of a family, so, anyone that is thinking about their family, you say, I want to do this for my family. Some people might need to do this for their health so they can be with their family. Maybe you're doing it for your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, mom, dad, for people that you love. You're doing it because of the specific example you want to set to someone that's looking to you, whatever the reason. But when you find a deeper reason to break that habit and move into a new one, you'll be more successful because now you're not just doing it for you, you're doing it for a higher purpose. And sometimes, unfortunately, because of our lack of self-worth and insecurity, we don't feel we're good enough to do it for. And we got to find another reason to do it until we see that we are good enough to break that habit for. And so keep that in mind. This is also a very strong tool to use to get your mind in the right way of thinking. I leave you with this last thought from Aristotle. We are what we repeatedly do. So keep in mind, we have to make a decision who we want to be, because what we repeatedly do is who we really are. So break those habits by using these tools to begin to build the life that you want. And keep in mind, there's no time like the present to build the life that you want. I'll be back with some final thoughts and tell you about our next show. I'll be right back. Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this show. This is a show that I know none of us can escape, including me. We all have habits we want to break. We all have things we want to be better. I want you to know, though, that this content that you heard tonight, this coaching you heard tonight, this is how URCL does it. We always are reaching down deeply and tying everything back to being the seal of ourselves and getting to the real way that you change yourself, the real way that you can advance yourself. And I want all of you that heard this tonight, I want you to think deeply about some of the habits that you want to attack. But remember, where the true genius is to dig down into those habits to see what the triggers are. Find the patterns that actually trigger the behavior. And it's not just the thought, it could be the time, it could be a person, it could be a smell, it could be something visual. What is the trigger? And when you find those triggers and you see what they are, study them. And you begin your journey in trying to be better about how you manage the habit loops that are in your life. And that's where the work is on you. I've empowered you with information, but it's up to you to use that power to build a better life. You are a CEO. Now, having said that, I want to remind everyone, if you have not done so already, as you can see on the screen, make sure you download our 2 free apps just for you. You can go to urco.com, create your username and password, and that gives you the key to these 2 doors, Uplifting CEO. And when you download the apps, you can use the same username and password to enter these 2 apps, where you can be in our uplifting environment and get more wonderful learning and insight like you've received tonight. Now, I also want to remind you the Seal of My Success Tour is still going. Now, our prayers go out to all those that's been affected by the coronavirus. We know there's been a lot happening all around the world. We're keeping our eye on it as well. Make sure you keep sanitizing those hands, washing your hands, being safe, doing all that you can. We still are going to keep this tour going and be monitoring things, but we'll keep you updated should anything change. Right now, we are prepared on May 30th to be at Cal State Hayward, Cal State East Bay. It was Hayward when I was there. I always forget to say that, but you all know what I'm talking about. It's in Hayward, California, and I want you to save that date. May 30th, we're going to have another success explosion, and I want you to be there. So if you are able, make sure you come to that. Now, you can stream, but we want as many people as possible to come in person. If you are in here locally and you are in the area, do not stream. Come there. We want to see you. We want to feel you. We want to touch base. So make sure you come to that wonderful event. Now, having said that, I want to tell you about our next show on March 16th. We're going to be coming together to talk about excellence makes good jealous, because this is, again, what we talk about all the time. You should be familiar with how we feel about excellence, but we're going to approach it from a different angle on this show, so make sure you do not miss it. So from now until then, get out there and let the whole world know that you are a CEO.